of weeks, we will celebrate Public Service Recognition Week. And we will honor our public service heroes. And if I had the authority to nominate one, I would nominate our guest speaker today, Judge Nancy Griswold. So after serving for 30 years as an administrative law judge in state and federal programs, Nancy Griswold was appointed to serve as Deputy Director for the Office of Workers' Compensation Programs at the U.S. Department of Labor. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Director, she served as Chief Administrative Law Judge and Agency Head for the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals, which is responsible for deciding the third level of appeals of denials of payments for Medicare goods and services. She began her career as an attorney practicing personal injury law in Shreveport, Louisiana. And in 1990, she accepted a position as a workers' compensation judge for the Louisiana Workers' Compensation Administration. She then served as the chief judge there for 3 years, during which she established Louisiana's Workers' Compensation Mediation Program. In 1995, she accepted a position as a U.S. Administrative Law Judge for the Social Security Administration. And over the next 15 years, she served in various management positions, leading to her appointment as Deputy Chief Judge in Washington, D.C. During her years as Deputy Chief, she served as the alter ego of the Chief Judge and assisted in formulating and implementing the Commissioner's backlog reduction initiatives. You can imagine what that backlog looks like. Hate to think about it. In 2010, Griswold was appointed Chief Administrative Law Judge for the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals, where she supervised the second largest corps of administrative law judges in federal service. Under her leadership, the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals opened 6 new offices, established uniform appeals processes, and developed a backlog reduction plan, which includes an alternative dispute resolution program designed to assist in handling the increasing workload of Medicare appeals. Judge Griswold graduated from Louisiana State University with a BA in English and then earned her JD from Baylor Law School. But that's not all she does. In her spare time, she enjoys watercolor, piano, travel, and she also sings with the Thomas Circle Singers, one of the finest choral groups in Washington, D.C.
I'm going to do something that is dangerous for every speaker, which is to make a pivot in what I was going to say and kind of veer away from what I had planned. That is not something that I recommend to anybody, but I was having a conversation a little bit earlier with a couple of the guests about the museum that is sort of being planned. And I got to thinking about my career and some events that occurred that kind of led me to the point I am. So I'm going to veer just a little bit. When I was very, very young and still in high school and college, trying to figure out, as we all do, what on earth am I going to do with myself? What am I going to do with my life? And I felt like I really felt a call to mission of some sort. It felt like I might consider that, felt like I might go into music. And I was struggling with these decisions of whether to really go directly into direct service or go into some other sort of career. I ended up going to law school, and I did that. My mother, a very wise woman, knew my mother on video anyway. When we would travel, we would talk to my mother on the phone. But she told me, she said, just because you go into a career doesn't mean you're not going into service. Any career can be service. My mother was a teacher. She taught essentially the throwaways, the students that back in those days were labeled the slow learners, the discipline problems. And she taught them in their early teens, their 12 to 16-year-old range. And I watched her do that. Her work her vocation was service. She was a teacher, but she was a servant teacher. So I kind of adopted that philosophy. I went to law school. I had, in my first 5 years, I kind of got into the rat race of trying to make a living as a lawyer. And I wasn't really happy with that. So I had decided to go back to school and get a degree in English, my PhD, and teach like my mother had. That was my plan. So I was going to throw away my law degree. She's going, yes, too many lawyers in the world. Throw away my law degree and go into something else. I got a call from the director of the workers' compensation program in Louisiana. They were establishing a new administrative law system. And I decided I will give this one more shot before I throw away my education, my career, and start over. And so I did. And it's these little steps along the way that kind of lead you to wherever, to where you end up in your 60s, like me, looking back and saying, how did I get here? So that was one of the first ones. I was 30 years old. I was an administrative law judge. And I found myself trying to supervise judges who had been district court judges in their 60s. I'm 30. I'm a woman. And I made some really, really big mistakes. So I was a chief judge for the state at 33. And the mistakes that I made were to try to be dictatorial. It wasn't until much later that I sort of learned that there's a difference between supervision, management, and leadership. And if you're dealing with judges, you can't really effectively use the first two tools. In federal government, which is where I found myself next as a Social Security judge, and then as deputy chief for over 600 Social Security judges. That number went up to around 1,200 at one point at its highest. So Social Security judges, and then as a chief judge for Medicare judges, I had to find other tools because under the Administrative Procedures Act, you cannot performance manage an ALJ. And if you want to discipline them for not performing well or for improper conduct or something like that, you have to go to the Merit Systems Protection Board in advance, tell them what the problem is, and essentially ask for permission to take an action against an ALJ. Now, the reason for that is valid because we want judges to have independence. We do not want them to be subject to influence or coercion by a supervisor who is sitting there overseeing their performance. But the situation does make it very, very hard to lead. I often felt like you remember the scene in Ben-Hur where he's driving the chariot with the horses and he's got 5 reins and he's got all these horses going. That's how it really, really felt. So I started studying leadership as a concept and found that was really my answer because you had to get these judges to follow. You couldn't push them in any direction, really. And so I took some really great classes in leadership and started making that distinction. So leadership is effectively and responsibly engaging with people, processes and programs to achieve goals. And it really is a process of social influence. There is a story of a stonemason that I've found really impactful. So there are these two stonemasons. We go back, May, to Michelangelo and the building of Bernini and the great sculptors and the building of the cathedrals, Chartres and all of those. And you have two stonemasons, and they are sitting there, stone cutters. And the supervisor walks by and he asks the first one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm cutting stone." And he walks to the second one and he says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm cutting this block of stone to make sure it's square so that it will fit in the right place." He walks to the third one. He asks him what he's doing. And he says, "I'm building a cathedral." That really hit me hard, because if you're going to lead people who really can't be managed or supervised, you have to engage them in mission. You have to engage them somehow in vision, some shared goal. There's a guy, I don't know if any of you have ever heard him before. His name is Simon Sinek. Have you listened to his stuff? He's got some great TED Talks. He has a wonderful presentation about working with millennials, which I find really helpful. But he also has a book called Talk About Why. And he discusses essentially this differentiation between supervision, management, and leadership. But he calls it the golden circle. And for leaders, the goal is to be in the center of that circle. The outer part is what you do. You know, I'm cutting stone. The middle part of it is the how. You know, I'm using chisel, I'm doing these things to make it square so that it can fit in place. But the middle of the circle is the why. Why are you doing it? Why is it important? Why does it matter? And for me, that's where all of this connects to public service. As I look back on what I've done, I have really spent a legal career working to help many of the most vulnerable populations in our society. Injured workers, Social Security, disability claimants, and then finally, Medicare recipients. Part of what I have tried to do as I lead these various groups is to come up with an authentic reason that resonates with me, why the work they're doing, the work we are doing is important. For me, it was easy with Social Security. I had I was doing this before the virtual era, before people were on video. So they were coming in front of me and telling me about their concerns and their issues. That was right in my face. And I had one of them tell me, I asked, "Are you looking for work? You know, are you trying to go back to work?" And he said to me, "No, not yet. I'm waiting to see what happens with this." And that answer to me said, it doesn't matter so much to the worker. Of course, it matters whether they get benefits or they don't. But regardless, they're on hold until they get a decision from the judge. Their life is on hold. Some of them are living with family members. They're just waiting. And so timely decisions has always been part of what I tried to do in all of these ALJ organizations. And you can tell I've worked with a few backlogs in my past, but trying to get to a point where people could get those answers from a judge in an expeditious fashion. With Medicare, it was a little bit harder to make that connection because we were largely dealing with reimbursements or payments to hospitals, to doctors. So there wasn't that sort of in-your-face need. But my mother was a Medicare, she was on Medicare. And I came to realize that the integrity of the Medicare payment system, what we were working through as judges, was critical to her welfare, to the welfare of aged Americans, because we want doctors to stay engaged. We want them to continue to take Medicare assignment. And in order to do that, we had to get them paid on a timely basis because they have cash flow issues. Now with workers' comp, where I am now, we deal with injured energy workers. We deal with people who are injured on defense bases. We deal with war hazards claims, longshore and harbor workers, and federal employees. So part of my campaign right now with workers' comp is to kind of reframe what we do so that our employees will recognize that they really are the people who are serving federal employees. And so the message in all that for me is you have to find something you can connect with if you're going to lead effectively, because people know if you are authentic or if you are just spinning a tale. Even children generally know that. So, so that has been my lesson. I have 48 seconds left on my clock, and I'm going to leave you with one quote, if I can find it. And it's from Robert Frost. It's from a poem called Two Tramps in Mud Time. My object in living is to unite my avocation, my love, and my vocation, my job. As my two eyes make one in sight, only where love and need are one, and the work is play for mortal stakes, is the deed ever really done for heaven and the future's sakes. Robert Frost. Thank you.
We are going to open up the floor for questions, if anyone has a question.
So Nancy,
Yes, ma'am.
you teach a course in ethics for judges.
I do.
And I'm wondering if you think the Supreme Court needs a code of ethics.
Okay. I can't comment because I can't comment on that. And I should have given my caveat at the beginning from an ethics perspective, but I got up and just started talking. My caveat is that I am here on my own behalf. I am not representing the Department of Labor or any other federal organization. And you can tell that just kind of rolls trippingly off the tongue because I have said that many times.
So in your speech, you mentioned being 33
Yeah.
and leading a team of 60 plus or seasoned judges. I like to
Yep.
call them seasoned. As you can see, I'm a millennial myself leading this organization. Also at work, I'm fairly the youngest in my team all the time. How did you overcome those barriers? And if you could elaborate on that experience.
Well, that was going to be the original presentation, which was the School of Hard Knocks. And like I said, I started out by making a lot of mistakes. You know, I look back at how I left that job with workers' comp after having tried to essentially send down directives. And I called them directives. You know, I just didn't know any better. And quite frankly, in 1990, we weren't talking about leadership that much. We were talking about management, and leadership as a concept came up somewhat later. I do think that you overcome some of those things. You have to find your own way of leading, and the same tools don't always work for every person. My experience has been that men can lead in a different way than women can lead. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that we have to learn how to approach things differently. I used to do horseback riding, and the guy that I took horseback riding from told me, he said, women make great horseback riders because they know they can't outmuscle the horse. Now that to me was a leadership lesson. You know, you have an organization of individuals, you can't outmuscle it. What you do, he said, women will get the reins and they'll tug, 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 until the horse realizes it's better to go in that direction than it is to keep going straight. So that's my lesson there. Find your own path. And if it doesn't work for you, abandon it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Cohen. I am the incoming president-elect of this club.
Right.
So in July, I'll take that helm. I want to thank you for coming and speaking today. The subject of leadership is huge right now in my spirit because I've always been like the person who pulls people together to organize. And what I realized through doing that is that there are some people who will get a title as a leader, a president, a queen, and dictate. And their only mission is to say, I'm in charge, I'm doing this, this is what I want. The way that I would like to approach my new position in this club is part of what you said, and that is to bring this entire club together to tell me what is needed and what everybody's wants are. So I really appreciate that. And I appreciate you admitting that you started out with the whole, I'm telling y'all what to do.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, I like that you're an English major. So I did it backwards. I was told that if I go for the law degree, that I would lose my creativity. Not true. Meanwhile, I did the English degree first and then went to get a master's in law. So I think we think alike a little bit.
We probably do. Yeah.
All right.
I think
All right.
we do.
Thank you.
And I would just add to what she said, any good leader is going to have a toolkit. There's a wonderful series of articles in Harvard Business Review by a gentleman named Stephen Goldman. I think it's Stephen Goldman. Anyway, he gives you all of the different leadership styles. Daniel Goldman, I knew I had it in here. Coercive, authoritative, affiliative, which is your sort of collaborative, democratic, pace setting, and coaching. Those are your basic styles. Not every style is going to work in every situation. If you are in an earthquake in a building, you really need somebody to have a coercive style. Get down the stairs, If you're in a war, you need coercive, dictatorial, but that doesn't work in all situations. So part of it is figuring out which leadership style works for which particular situation. And what you're doing is collaborative and team building, and that's really good. The other thing I would say, watch the scene from Apollo 13, where the leader, and I can't remember his name, and I don't have that in my notes, but the leader is there and they're trying to build that air scrubbing unit. Do you remember that scene where they pulled everything out on the table? He has the de facto authority, but he's not going to be the one leading the meeting. He starts it, but then he backs away because people with technical knowledge and with innovative ideas, that's what's needed there. And he has the good sense to recognize that. So go find that on YouTube. You can watch that one and it's worth seeing.
Thank you so much for for this presentation. I'd like to switch to a little bit to your experience with judges, with sort of three related questions. There's been a lot of politicization of, a lot of accusations, let's say, from both sides of the aisle on whether our system is politicized and what judges are doing. I'm not going to ask you about that, but I am going to ask you, what's your experience with all these judges you worked on? What motivates them? How would you characterize them? Second is, rule of law is really important, something we have. What makes our system, our judicial system, work? Why does it work when in so many places it doesn't? And third, what are the problems you see that need addressing in our judicial system?
Okay, so I can answer those because they're kind of general questions, and I'm really wary of the Hatch Act. So that's what I'm kind of staying away from, even though I'm here in my personal capacity. So what I have seen with judges in all the organizations is that for the most part, they want to do the right thing. The biggest problem that I ever saw was inertia, was the reluctance to actually make a decision. And usually that was motivated by fear of being wrong. You know, so they just molded and molded and molded. And by doing that, that old phrase, justice delayed is justice denied, is really relevant when you're dealing with disability. So finding a way to enable them to just go ahead and make a decision. Let people get on with their lives. Now, that's not to say that every judge was in that category. You take any group of people and they're going to be outliers. But we're talking about thousands of judges, and most of them in government are going around doing their jobs the best they know how to do them. The ones that make the news are the ones that don't. And that's a small group. To your second question about what makes it work, it goes back for me to the social contract. If you go back and you read your political science and your political history, Rousseau and, I can't remember the others, Hobbes, Locke, thank you. The only reason, and this is remarkable about judges, if you're sitting there as a judge over a dispute, I don't care whether it's Social Security or Medicare or on the Supreme Court, you have two sides come in front of you, human beings in front of another human being. And when they leave, they abide by your decision. That just floors me, because there's nothing, you know, there's nothing except public trust that makes that happen. And so when public trust starts being eroded in institutions, we're in a dangerous spot. Because that is, in my mind, what keeps us from anarchy. We've got to keep, the public has to trust the institutions, the judiciary in particular. That's my 2 cents.
That reminded me of my first job as a lawyer was right around the corner here. I worked for the chairman of the Merit Systems Protection Board.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I was a Reagan appointee, and my boss, the chairman, was also a Reagan appointee. And I got thrown into a windowless office with another law clerk, and stacked from floor to ceiling, the whole
Yeah.
office was the air traffic controller appeals.
Yeah.
that Reagan had fired every one of them.
Right.
All day long, we would read every case, which was absolutely identical, and make a recommendation to the board about whether to reinstate them or not. Do you know if they ever got reinstated? Because it was a
I have
highly
no
political
idea.
situation.
I wish I mean, that's an interesting story, but I think that is often the case in all of these administrative agencies. You have an event like that takes place, and then all of a sudden there are massive numbers of appeals. We get into backlog situations because the budget process as we have it doesn't allow us to pivot quickly. We've got a, couple of years, you can make a budget request, but even that, we're making budget requests for 2025. So when you have an influx of appeals like that, it happened in Social Security. I saw it. I saw the numbers going up. I saw them going up in Medicare.
Thank you for a great presentation.
Thanks.
What is your opinion with administrative courts as opposed to judicial courts under the judiciary? Or I mean, are they pretty much operate with the same mentality, or is one easier to navigate than the other?
No, they're very different. I think the Article 3, the judiciary courts, they have much more independence. They have what is called full judicial independence.
Third branch of government.
I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Executive.
So the
legislature.
executive branch, the administrative courts under, did I say Article 1?
I think
3. Okay. Judiciary Article 3, executive branch Article 1.
Article 1.
Yeah. So the administrative courts do not have that full judicial immunity or judicial authority. judicial independence. What they have is qualified decisional independence. So they are bound to follow the policies of their agency. They do not have the authority to declare those policies unconstitutional. They don't have equity powers. They really are there just to be experts in a particular area of administrative law and to apply the policies, the laws, and the regulations to a given set of facts. But they don't have the broad powers that the judicial branch does.
Is our tendency to go more toward the administrative courts?
I think that varies. I mean, I think there was a great growth in administrative courts, starting with the passage of the APA. Social Security actually predated the Administrative Procedures Act. Their hearing officers, they were called then. But there are a lot of agencies now that rely on administrative law judges as decision makers. Most of those have some sort of appeal to the judicial branch. Social Security appeals can go to the judicial branch.
What is the traffic court? Is that administrative or judicial?
Traffic court, you're talking about like city court?
Yeah, you get a speeding.
Yeah, that's going to be judicial branch.
Judicial.
Yeah.
So you left us hanging. I have been on a horse 2 or 3 times. Survived. I always knew the horse was far bigger and stronger than I was, but I figured I was smarter than the horse.
Yeah.
But you said the woman sort of tugs and
Yeah.
eventually the horse knows what to do. You didn't say what the man does.
They use spurs generally. I mean, I would go riding out in Colorado. So it was a bit of the Wild West. And I saw a lot of rodeo riders just kicking that horse with a spur and yanking. And eventually the horse is going to rebel. And the guy is liable to get thrown. If he doesn't get thrown, he has at the very least ruined a horse. Yeah. And now you have my horsemanship philosophy as well.
I have a follow-up. Do you see men and women's leadership styles evolving? Or do you still look at it that way? You said, years ago.
I think everything evolves. I think leadership in general evolves. Leading now is not like it was when I started. But I do think that there are simply perceptions. And as women, we can either try to fight those perceptions or we can work with them. And I have found it more effective at my point in time in my career to work with them. Because I have seen men in meetings be very aggressive and very dictatorial, and they get away with it. If a woman tries to do that, we get labeled in a different way. So, and I don't want that because it affects my ability to be effective. Thanks.
Thank you so much for such a great, you can stay up here.
Oh, stay up here.
Quickly. I am pleased and proud to present you with this certificate signifying our commitment to plant a tree in your honor in our nation's capital.
Lovely. I
Shirley
couldn't be
wants to take a
happier.
picture.